Thank you for joining us. We are currently playing our pre-event slideshow. Blue text on a white background. Welcome, the program will begin shortly. This slide and slides following feature the Schomburg Center Literary Festival branding in the upper right corner, with white text in a dark blue bubble with 3 peach-colored droplets overlaid. There is a digital collage image of a Black man on the left, pictured from the chest up, with different shades of brown making up his skin, wearing a patchwork shirt of varying blue patterns, and a bird's eye image of a street with 2 cars on it, one white and one yellow, cutting diagonally across his chest. This slide and all slides following also contain sponsor logos in the bottom right. Sponsored by New York Life Foundation, Deutsche Bank Americas Foundation, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the New York Public Library. Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org. Blue text on a white background. Author talk. Audre Lorde, Radical Care and Political Warfare. Roxane Gay, Tracy K Smith, Mahogany L, Browne and Salamishah Tillet, Moderator. September 22nd, 2020 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Blue text on a white background. Order the book online from the Schomburg shop, www.schomburgshop.com. This slide features book jackets for 3 Audre Lorde titles on the left side. There is the selected works of Audre Lorde with a photo portrait of Audre Lorde wearing a white blouse, leaning against a wall and gazing into the camera. To the right is the book jacket for Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde in pink text running vertically down the cover on a dark red background with gold flourishes. The third featured book is The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde with a photo collage of Audre Lorde wearing a patterned dress with an orange and black halo encircling her head on a yellow and teal floral background. Thank you for joining us. We are currently playing our pre-event slideshow. Blue text on a white background. Welcome, the program will begin shortly. This slide and slides following feature the Schomburg Center Literary Festival branding in the upper right corner, with white text in a dark blue bubble with 3 peach-colored droplets overlaid. There is a digital collage image of a Black man on the left, pictured from the chest up, with different shades of brown making up his skin, wearing a patchwork shirt of varying blue patterns, and a bird's eye image of a street with 2 cars on it, one white and one yellow, cutting diagonally across his chest. This slide and all slides following also contain sponsor logos in the bottom right. Sponsored by New York Life Foundation, Deutsche Bank Americas Foundation, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the New York Public Library. Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org. Blue text on a white background. Author talk. Audre Lorde, Radical Care and Political Warfare. Roxane Gay, Tracy K Smith, Mahogany L, Browne and Salamishah Tillet, Moderator. September 22nd, 2020 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Blue text on a white background. Order the book online from the Schomburg shop, www.schomburgshop.com. This slide features book jackets for 3 Audre Lorde titles on the left side. There is the selected works of Audre Lorde with a photo portrait of Audre Lorde wearing a white blouse, leaning against a wall and gazing into the camera. To the right is The Book Jacket for Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, in pink text running vertically down the cover on a dark red background with gold flourishes. The third featured book is The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde, with a photo collage of Audre Lorde wearing a patterned dress with an orange and black halo encircling her head on a yellow and teal floral background.
Good evening from New York, and welcome to the second annual Schomburg Center Literary Festival, Reading the African Diaspora. Like many book festivals, we had to reimagine a block-long, multi-stage outdoor festival as a virtual one with your favorite writers and the opportunity to discover more books to add to your shelves. This week, we have 35 authors and moderators sharing narratives from the US and UK to West Africa and Jamaica. Each night, we shift between the past and the present, much like the Schomburg Center's archives and programs. Tonight's program, Audre Lorde, Radical Care and Political Warfare, features writers Roxane Gay, Tracy K Smith, Mahogany Browne, and moderator Salamishah Tillet. And I will tell you more about them in a moment. I'm Novella Ford. I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs and Exhibitions at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where we are celebrating 95 years as one of the world's leading cultural institutions devoted to research, preservation, and exhibition of materials focused on global Black experiences. Our archive boasts over 11 million items that illuminate the richness of Black history and culture, and we have made some of those items available digitally as we continue to navigate the quarantine imposed by COVID-19. Please visit our website at schomburg.org for additional details. And I hope you do get a chance to visit our archives on the other side of this quarantine. Thank you for tuning in, as I mentioned, to the Schomburg Center Literary Festival. If you are watching live via our LitFest website, which is schomburgcenterlitfest.org, you can scroll to the bottom and you can shop all the books featured tonight. You can also see the week-long schedule so that you can plan the rest of your week. To give you a heads up, tomorrow we will explore the work of Sterling A. Browne, one of the most important and influential figures in the development of African American literature and criticism in the 20th century. Then on Thursday, we have a day-long spotlight on YA authors and books, which begins at 1 p.m. Some of the authors featured include Jacqueline Woodson in conversation with LeVar Burton, followed by UK author Dean Atta in conversation with Emil Wilbekin. We have a panel on Black comic books. We close that day with debut author and National Book Award long list author, Candace Elo. We have some additional YA authors appearing on Saturday, including Akweke Eminzi and Patrice Cullors, who you may know as the Black Lives Matter, one of the Black Lives Matter founders, who has released a YA edition of her memoir, When They Call You a Terrorist. So I hope that you will check in beyond today for other programs that we have taking place over the Schomburg Lit Fest. And just a reminder, you can watch this on schomburgcenterlitfest.org. And if you miss anything, we will have an opportunity for you to rewatch them in the coming weeks. This festival continues to expand the Schomburg's long tradition of championing authors of African descent from across the globe in publications that celebrate Black history and culture. How fortunate that there are 3 books revisiting the essential writings of Audre Lorde at this time. Who knew that Audre Lorde was the person that we would need in this moment? But I would say that she is always present, she is always needed. And as Sonia Sanchez, when she could have chosen so many authors to read from last week when we had a program around poets, she chose 2 poems by her friend Audre Lorde, as well as Alice Walker. So I'm going to introduce the panel so that they can introduce you to their Audre Lorde. First, we have Mahogany L. Browne, who is a writer, organizer, and educator. She's the executive director of Bowery Poetry Club and artistic director of Urban Word NYC and poetry coordinator at the St. Francis College. She is the author of Woke, A Young Poet's Call to Justice, Woke Baby, and Black Girl Magic, Kissing Caskets, and Dear Twitter. She will release her first YA novel, Chlorine Sky, in January 2021, and I hope that we can host her again next year. Mahogany has provided the foreword for Penguin Classics republication of Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, a collection of 15 essays and speeches. Next, Roxane Gay has edited the newest release, the selected works of Audre Lorde. Gay's writing appears in Best American Mystery Stories 2014, Best American Short Stories 2012, Best Sex Writing in 2012, Harper Bazaar, A Public Space, McSweeney's, Tin House, Oxford American, and many, many others. She's a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. She's the author of books A.T., An Untamed State, the New York Times bestselling Bad Feminist, the nationally bestselling Difficult Women, and the New York Times bestselling Hunger, a memoir of my body. She is also the author of World of Wakanda for Marvel and the editor of Best American Short Stories 2018. Next is Tracy K Smith, who is no stranger to the Schomburg, and she is one of the most celebrated poets of our time. She served as the 22nd United States Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019, and is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, Ordinary Light, and several books of poetry, including her Pulitzer Prize-winning collection, Life on Mars. She is the director of creative writing program at Princeton University and the chair of the university's Lewis Center for the Arts. Tracy has provided the foreword to another republication of Audre Lorde's work, The Cancer Journals, available in October. And last but certainly not least is our moderator, Salamishah Tillet, who is the Henry Rutgers Professor of African American and African Studies and Creative Writing at Rutgers University, Newark. She is a contributing critic at large for the New York Times and the director of the New Arts Justice, an art and activist initiative at Express Newark. She is the author of Sites of Slavery, Citizenship, and Racial Democracy in the Post-Civil Rights Imagination, and the cultural memoir In Search of the Color Purple, the story of Alice Walker's masterpiece, which comes out in January 2021. Just to give you a few housekeeping, we are recording the program for the archive, but you, the audience, will not be part of the recording. Please be mindful of your fellow audience members in the chat, and again, thank you for tuning in. We will begin with readings from each of our panelists, so please, first we welcome to our virtual stage, Roxane Gay to read from the selected works of Audre Lorde.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here today, and especially to be able to read some of Audre Lorde's work. She is one of those writers who remains timeless, and every time I read and reread and engage with her work, I am reminded anew of why I have always been drawn to her work. For the past few events, I've been reading her prose, so tonight I'm going to read just a few poems. The first is from her book, The First Cities, and this is called Generation. How the young attempt and are broken differs from age to age. We were brown, free girls, loved singing beneath their skin, sun in their hair, in their eyes, sun their fortune, the taste of their young boys' manhood swelling like birds in their mouths. In a careless season of power, we wept out our terrible promise. Now these are the children we try for temptations that wear our face and who came back from the latched cities of falsehood. Warning, the road to nowhere is slippery with our blood. Warning, you need not drink the river to get home. For we purchase bridges with our mother's bloody gold. We are more than kin who come to share, not blood, but the bloodiness of failure. How the young are tempted and betrayed to slaughter or conformity is a turn of the mirror, time's question only. And also from that book is a poem called If You Come Softly. If you come softly, as wind within the trees, you may hear what I hear, see what sorrow sees. If you come as lightly as threading dew, I will take you gladly, nor ask more of you. You may sit beside me, silent as breath. Only those who stay dead shall remember death. And if you come, I will be silent, nor speak harsh words to you. I will not ask you why, now, or how, or what you do. We shall sit here softly beneath two different years, and the rich earth between us shall drink our tears. Now let's see. And finally, I want to read a poem called Who Said It Was Simple? Who said it was simple? There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in netics, the women rally before they march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first, and the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering, which me will survive all these liberations? Thank you guys so much. And next, we are going to hear from the absolutely wonderful Mahogany Browne.
Woo, okay, Miss Roxane. I just feel like that those three poems got my heart racing. I feel everyone feels that too. Thank you for opening with such tenderness. We always think of Audre Lorde reminding us that your silence will not protect you, but like love is also a revolution, and that is a prime example. I'm going to read from the collection Sister Outsider, a small piece of an essay that she wrote in Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference. And then I'll close with the poem. And thank you so much again for having me. Shout out to Schoenberg for being the illest. Certainly, there are very real differences between us of race, age, and sex. But it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences and to examine the distortions which result from our misnaming them and their effects upon human behavior and expectation. Racism, the belief in the inherent superiority of one race over all others and thereby the right to dominance. Sexism, the belief in the inherent superiority of one sex over the other and thereby the right to dominance. Ageism, heterosexism, elitism, classism. Somewhere on the edge of consciousness, there is what I call a mythical norm, which each one of us within our hearts knows that is not me. In America, this norm is usually defined as white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure. It is with this mythical norm that the trappings of power reside within the society. Those of us who stand outside that power often identify one way in which we are different, and we assume that to be the primary cause of all oppression, forgetting other distortions around difference, some of which we ourselves may be practicing. By and large, within the women's movement today, white women focus upon their oppression as women and ignore differences of race, sexual preference, class, and age. There is a pretense to the homogeny of experience covered by the word sisterhood that does not, in fact, exist. As we move forward, as we move toward creating a society within which we can each flourish, ageism is another distortion of relationship which interferes without vision. By ignoring the past, we are encouraged to repeat its mistakes. The generation gap is an important social tool for any repressive society. If the younger members of a community view the older members as contemptible or suspect or excess, they will never be able to join hands and examine the living memories of the community, nor ask the all-important question, why? This gives rise to a historical amnesia that keeps us working to invent the wheel every time we have to go to the store for bread. Ignoring the differences of race between women and the implications of those differences presents the most serious threat to the mobilization of women's joint power. As white women ignore their built-in privilege of whiteness and define women in terms of their own experience alone, then women of color become other, the outsider whose experience and tradition is too alien to comprehend. I hope y'all are taking notes. I hope you're with me. This is testimony, right? Refusing to recognize difference makes it impossible to see the different problems and pitfalls facing us as women. Thus, In a patriarchal power system where white skin privilege is a major prop, the entrapments used to neutralize Black women and white women are not the same. For example, it is easy for Black women to be used by the power structure against Black men, not because they are men, but because they are Black. Therefore, for Black women, it is necessary at all times to separate the needs of the oppressor from our own legitimate conflicts within our communities. This same problem does not exist for white women. Black women and men have shared racist oppression and still share it, although in different ways. Out of that shared oppression, we have developed joint defenses and joint vulnerabilities to each other that are not duplicated in the white community, with the exception of the relationship between Jewish women and Jewish men. On the other hand, white women face the pitfall of being seduced into joining the oppressor under the pretense of sharing power. This possibility does not exist in the same way for women of color. The tokenism that is sometimes extended to us is not an invitation to join power. Our racial otherness is a visible reality that makes it quite clear. For white women, there is a wider range of pretended choices and rewards for identifying with patriarchal power and its tools. But Black women and our children know the fabric of our lives is stitched with violence and with hatred, that there is no rest. We do not deal with it only on the picket lines or in dark midnight alleys or in the places where we dare to verbalize our resistance. For us, increasingly, violence weaves through the daily tissues of our living, in the supermarket, in the classroom, in the elevator, in the clinic and the schoolyard, from the plumber, the baker, the saleswoman, the bus driver, the bank teller, the waitress who does not serve us. Some problems we share as women, some we do not. You fear your children will grow up to join the patriarchy and testify against you. We fear our children will be dragged from a car and shot down in the street, and you will turn your backs upon the reasons they are dying. You definitely can read the rest of that in that Sister Outsider collection. And I'll close with one short poem. The women of Dan dance with swords in their hands to mark the time when they were warriors. And this is for us. Thank you for letting me be a part of this Femme Fatale collective today. I did not fall from the sky, nor descend like a plague of locusts to drink color and strength from the earth. And I do not come like rain as a tribute or symbol for earth's becoming. I come as a woman, dark and open. Sometimes I fall like night, softly and terrible, only when I must die in order to rise again. I do not come like a secret warrior with an unsheathed sword in my mouth, hidden beneath my tongue, slicing my throat to ribbons of service with a smile while the blood runs down and out through holes in the two sacred mounds on my chest. I come like a woman who I am, spreading out through nights, laughter and promise and dark heat, warming whatever I touch. That is living, consuming only what is already dead. Thank you so much. And next you'll hear from the incomparable Tracy K Smith.
Thanks, Mahogany, and thanks, Roxane. It's one thing to live with a love and a gratitude to Lorde, and it's another to hear her words embodied tonight and feel how much we need them as a nation, as a people. It's an urgency, I feel. So it's a real gift to be here tonight and be able to share. I thought I would kind of give a little love song to my experience of the Cancer Journals, and then share a poem of Lorde's, maybe quote from one other brief passage in Sister Outsider. But I wanted to begin with just thinking about the brilliant way that Lorde's work upon her experience of cancer and mastectomy. Also, it sheds light on the private experience that many of us must encounter. And it also creates a really powerful vocabulary for resistance in other contexts. I want to think about the honesty with which Lorde tracks the pain, fear, anger, and insight of the experience of cancer. And I want to think about the ways that her mind and spirit refused to let any of that battle go to waste. It's I think, an example of like consummate resourcefulness. On one level, what she offers in the essays and journal entries making up the cancer journals is a discourse on the politics of cancer, which she describes as a profit-producing industry, which has sidestepped questions of arresting causality and instead created a market for things like prosthetics and reconstructive surgery products, which Lorde argues reinforce the dangerous notion that female bodies must be pretty and palatable to others. Describing her own post-op experience, Lorde writes, "In the offices of one of the top breast cancer surgeons in New York City, every woman there either had a breast removed, might have to have a breast removed, or was afraid of having to have a breast removed. And every woman there could have used a reminder that having one breast did not mean her life was over, nor that she was less a woman, nor that she was condemned to the use of a placebo in order to feel good about herself and the way she looked. Yet, a woman who has one breast and refuses to hide that fact behind a pathetic puff of lamb's wool, which has no relationship nor likeness to her own breasts, a woman who is attempting to come to terms with her changed landscape and changed timetable of life, and with her own body and pain and beauty and strength, that woman is seen as a threat to the, quote, morale of a breast surgeon's office." The clarity with which Lorde calls out this infuriating contradiction has bearing upon our attitudes towards mastectomies, female body image, and autonomy. And all this time later, it also urges me to consider another malignancy roiling American society, which is that of racism, which leverages its own forms of censure and social sanction against those who refuse to be cowed into silence and assimilation. In this context, I take Lorde's testimony of her experience as a kind of roadmap, not just to enduring or withstanding oppression, but laying bare its workings for others to see and making such knowledge into an instrument of resistance. For Lorde, resistance must draw upon the deep private resources of the self, while also maintaining a commitment to the collective, the communal. It's generative, it's corrective. In her words, this commitment, quote, means teaching, surviving, and fighting with the most important resource I have, myself, and taking joy in that battle. It means for me recognizing the enemy outside and the enemy within, and knowing that my work is part of a continuum of women's work, of reclaiming this earth and our power, and knowing that this work did not begin with my birth, nor will it end with my death. And it means knowing that in this continuum, my life and my love and my work has particular power and meaning relative to others. I witness evidence of a similar recognition in the current movement coalescing around the sanctity of Black life in America, and with it the importance of Black stories, Black creativity, Black self-care, and Black community as things we must overcome barriers, both internal and external, to claim. I witness this commitment as a surge of power and consciousness, both coinciding with and arising from the equal surge in violence and intolerance against Blackness and Black calls for justice. So I guess what I'm intending to emphasize is the vulnerabilities that Lorde claims as a woman, artist, and survivor are not obstacles to the work that she does. In many ways, they make this work possible. There's a quote from the essay that opens Sister Outsider that I just want to share, notes from a trip to Russia. It comes into my head because, you know, during this literal struggle for her life, she's traveling, she's teaching others, teaching white feminists how they might better situate themselves to accept and support Black women. And she's making a kind of sense out of other people's experience that might be useful to the conditions of Black reality in America that she's so concerned with. This is just a little quote from Notes on a Trip to Russia. And that trip was really about looking for every kernel of insight, of possibility, and every tool that she might be able to apply to this human struggle that she's interested in and invested in. I came away with revolutionary women in my head, but I feel very much now still that we, Black Americans, exist alone in the mouth of the dragon. As I've always suspected, outside of rhetoric and proclamations of solidarity, there is no help except ourselves. Maybe I'll just leave that there and urge you to dive back into this really remarkable prose that I feel is critical to getting through the moment that we find ourselves in, which is brutal and also, I think, so full of possibility that I want to claim. This is Lorde's poem, A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning, when our stomachs are full and we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. I'll join all of us to come back on.
I would like to thank everyone. First, I would like to thank Novella and the Schomburg for inviting us. And also thank you, Tracy, Mahogany, and Roxane for sharing Audre's wonderful words. And thank Audre herself for giving us the language and the vocabulary of resistance. I feel like everything that you all covered kind of reminds us that she's given us all the tools we need to survive the moment we're in and resist the forces that are working against our liberation. So I've had the pleasure of reading everyone's foreword to books that are about to be released and books that have already been released. And so I'm going to ask you all in the order of your reading about your forewords, and then I'm going to do a series of just open-ended questions that anyone can answer. And with the foreword, each of you obviously are citing or quoting Audre. And so Roxane, I'm going to start with you. In your foreword, you're retelling the story of Audre's letter to Mary Daly. And there's so many quotes that I wanted to cite that you cite, but I'm going to start with this one. The future of our Earth may depend upon the ability of all women to identify and develop new definitions of power and new patterns of relating across difference. So we're at this really important historical moment with the passing of Justice Ginsburg and the potential nomination of another white woman to the Supreme Court. And I was thinking deeply about Lorde's insistence on thinking about there's a shared experience of womanhood, and yet within that these differences are so fundamental to how we need to organize and mobilize. And so if you could, and then your essay obviously talks about how intersectional feminism is kind of in vogue now, but Lorde, you know, was theorizing this many, many, many years ago. So I would just want you to talk a little bit more about this idea that Lorde gives us about power and patterns of difference, and the power of naming those things, and what we can learn about, you know, our moment now from this.
One of the things I thought Lorde was most revolutionary in doing was leaning into difference instead of seeing difference as an obstacle. Several times across her writing, she writes about difference as a source of strength. And really, she cautions the women in her communities to not be intimidated by difference and to not flatten difference. And it's so incredibly important. You know, intersectionality is a necessary tool. And Kimberly Crenshaw has done invaluable work in developing a really sound theory around intersectionality. But there have been so many, especially Black women scholars, who were theorizing and putting this work into practice well before that. And what I really appreciated, especially in Lorde's letter to Mary Daly, is that she was finding common ground, because yes, we are all women, while also, you know, just saying, can I live as a Black woman, as a Black lesbian? And it's interesting that we're having the very same conversations today, where we see oftentimes white feminists trying to flatten the differences between us and say, you know, we have to be united in solidarity, without recognizing that sometimes solidarity means discussing our differences, and discussing that solidarity does not mean that we ignore our differences. It means that we account for our differences, and we do whatever it takes to make sure that we move forward equally, and that there are things that we have to be done in order for that to happen. We're not going to move forward equally just because we're all women. And so I think about that a lot, and I was definitely trying to get at that in my introduction, because I think it's one of the most powerful things about Audre's work. As everyone here knows, people love to talk about the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. And it was a very profound thing that she said, but people always quote it selectively, and they don't quote everything that follows and everything around it, the entire body of work that led to this moment. And so I was very interested in making sure that we were looking at that she was talking about difference as strength, when it was such a rare thing for a scholar to do.
Thank you. Mahogany, you at the end of your essay quote Lorde's essay, Man-Child. And here's the quote that I would like to cite today. If they cannot love and resist at the same time, they will probably not survive. And it seems to me that that encapsulates many Black social movements, Black liberation movements, but maybe none as much as Black Lives Matter, and this idea of loving and resisting and rage, which is another theme through all of your works, which I'll come back to. So living and existing and effusing and emoting all of these emotions at the same time. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what this means to love and resist, and why Lorde, what you think Lorde meant by, if we can't do both, then we will not survive. If they can't do both, they will not survive. And then what that means for us in this really, 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 I don't know, generation changing moment that we're in.
Thank you for that. I think Sonia Sanchez, Sister Sonia Sanchez, also with the Black Arts Movement, was a champion of the idea that love is one of the first revolutions, that we can't be a part of this resistance. We can't be on the front line if there is not a way for us to go home, to recalibrate, and also just to center ourselves. I know that the reason that most of the work happens in the way that it does is because of love, right? That is James Baldwin says, I will love you and I'm gonna tell the truth. Like if I love you, I will tell the truth. So all of those things, like it's yin and yang. It's not one or the other. And rage cannot exist alone. That will kill you inside. Like that's tumor ready, ulcer ready. It messes with your heart, all of the things. And I believe that love is absolute and it is an equalizer. But again, it is like a part of the moral compass. And listening to Audre Lorde's work, I love what you said, Roxane, about folks saying half of the line. It's like the Bible, you know what I mean? Like they say the one that they want you to know, but not the stuff that they have to follow for that to make sense, right? So there's the equilibrium is always off, and we're only quoting the parts that are the shiniest. When the reality is, you know, there isn't just good or bad, it's both. So for revolution to happen, we have to have love attached to that. Otherwise, what are we really fighting for? Justice is love work. I don't know what else. I feel like I'm kind of going in a circle almost because I'm like, but of course, right? Of course. But I do understand how I'm saddened when people think that these poems that Audre wrote were just like angry poems. Because I'm like, but like when you read the first poem, Roxane, I was like, do you hear the love? And like she said, I come for you, which is like a double meaning. Not only am I coming to love, but I am coming through fire.
Thank you. And Tracy, it is through poetry that we give name to the ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be bathed, but already felt. About to be birthed, sorry, but already felt. And I guess I really am struck by the fact that many of the works that you're talking about you read from poems, but the books themselves show the breadth of Lorde's genre blending and genre bending. And so I guess I wanted to talk to you also about, writing about the journals themselves, and what is it that we can understand about Lorde's legacy, but about her intervention through thinking about her as a poet, but also as an essayist, and in terms of Zami as a biomythographer, the many genres that she inhabited, and how those genres in fact reflect the way in which she broke down so many categories at once, as both her lived experience, but also as a blueprint for like how difference can function in society, as Roxane said, as a form of strength.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel like the way I help myself to understand the work of poets who are doing huge life and culture work is their project is bigger than poetry. Audre Lorde is an amazing poet. Ultimately, I believe that what she's speaking to and invoking is much larger than a single art form. And one of the things that I think her prose allows her to do is to teach us to understand what poetry allows us to tap into. And this is something that's useful in every facet of existence. She talks about how, poetry is a place where knowledge precedes understanding, and we can enter into a kind of receptivity to things that don't yet fit within our vocabulary or our understanding, but that have imprinted us in some way, or that could be useful to us. She talks about like a deep and often a female creative power that she's interested in listening to and tapping into. And she posits that as really different from maybe a white male poetics of authority, of doing something that is impressive, that's working at the surface level. She kind of calls that out as, this is about fear. This is about wanting to claim the boundaries of an art form so that there's a power or a control that can also be claimed. And so her poems and her writing about what poetry offers us is about a lived urgency that we actually need. and that we possess. And I think that aligns really directly and beautifully with her sense of activism. There's something that we must claim and share and allow to startle, overwhelm, and embolden us. I love the way that the erotic energy is a part of that. You know, she talks about how female eroticism is another one of those things that the male kind of like establishment has taught us to shame, to feel shame toward, and how that is also a form of oppression because it creates a sense of silence and a relinquishing of power. She's saying, you know, no, let's use this as something that is life-giving, life-sustaining, and world-creating. I love the way that this conversation runs through all of her work, whether she's traveling, whether she's arguing, teaching, schooling folks, and whether she's mapping a sense of what we must become willing to do.
Thank you. I want to shift gears just a little. We've already started talking about anger, but I kind of, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to teach a graduate course on Black rage. And what I found from my class was that Lorde is probably one of the most profound and insightful theorists of Black anger or Black rage or anger in general in the various traditions that she occupies. So I'm going to read a quote here from Lorde. "Every Black woman in America lives her life somewhere along a wide curve of ancient and unexpressed angers." And so I was thinking with Mahogany, you were talking a bit about how people read the anger but don't hear the love. In Tracy's work, in her foreword, she talks about Lorde starts with anger and ends with insight. And then in Roxane, you two reference Lorde's uses of anger in your foreword, but also you wrote a really wonderful New York Times op-ed that we also read in my class as well. And so I wanted to talk about the way in which you all think that Lorde understood the power and the political value of Black women's anger as distinct from white male rage. And also, you know, just to tease this out a little bit, because I do think that if you actually want to understand Black women's anger as righteous, as radical, and as revolutionary, you have to start with Audre Lorde. At least she was wrestling with this and trying to understand how white women's anger is different than Black women's anger, and Black women's anger is different than white man's anger. So that's my question. How do you understand Lorde's relationship to anger and rage?
You know, I think that Lorde is one of the few women of her generation that embraced anger and saw it as a tool for change, and was very willing to push back against a lot of the preconceived notions people have about Black women and anger. She saw, like Difference, I think she saw anger as a strength, as a tool for building community and creating change. Because if you're not angry, then do you really understand the problems that we're trying to address? Because if you understand the problems, like, rage is the only response. And I really appreciated that. And I think for a lot of writers of my generation, she made it possible for us to express our rage. She made it possible for Brittany Cooper's Eloquent Rage, which is such a wonderful book, Tressie McMillan Cottom's Thick, which also explores the very things that we should be angry about and yet are often castigated for being angry about. So I thought she used it as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
I think she knew that we would need a cheat sheet. She knew that rage and the stereotype that Black angry woman was going to be the thing that kind of disabled so many of us from seeing clearly that you're right. We are, not only are we permitted to be angry, but we should be, right? And how do you move forward regardless of what category or ideas are assigned to you? Don't worry about the respectability, worry about the work. And it's because of her that I was able to even move through grad school in a way that was I would originally think like the church word indignant. I felt like I was just walking in, just slamming doors and putting my feet up. But in reality, I was just asking for what my scholarship afforded me. And the response told me, why would you think you could ask that? But Audre Lorde's text reminded me, you have a right to demand what you deserve.
Mm-hmm. I think about, the really powerful lesson of what Lorde does with her anger. So even that little scene of her going back into the surgeon's office and being scolded for having decided that she felt whole in a way and wanted to choose not to hide the fact of a missing breast. She goes home having not spoken up to this nurse, and she talks about the situation with her circle of loving women friends, and she forms a really intense argument about what this attitude is rooted in, the damage that it causes, and what it will take to move past it, to knock it over. I feel like it's a really powerful and thoughtful process that her anger sets her upon in every case. It's about dialogue. Even the letter to Mary Daly is a literal invitation to dialogue over a sense of grievance. It's about making the kinetic value of anger useful to countless other people, because it gets translated into this amazing body of work. Which is kind of a roadmap, as I keep, saying to myself. How do you survive a world that's full of all of these annihilating forces that are very deliberately pointing at you and what you represent? Well, you're going to turn that energy into a kind of action. All of the anger, all of the fear, all of the pain, and in her experience of cancer, all of that is like very literal. It's not even, like figurative. All of that gets turned into a set of ideas, a call to understanding and action. Anger is what pushes that into motion, I think.
I'd like to talk a little bit about what some would see as like kind of opposite of anger, but in no way is it in Lorde's life and in Lorde's universe, and this idea of self-care, right? And so her last book, Burst of Light, she is a journal similar to the cancer journals, and she's writing as she's literally dying of cancer. And she moves in and out between going to the doctor's office to organizing women in Germany, and moving back and forth between the individual and the collective, and retreating into writing, and yet trying to take care of herself in her final months, essentially. So I wanted to talk about how self-care is another thing that Lorde both practices and theorizes, and gives us a vocabulary to understand, and what that means in this moment of political mobilization and liberation, an organizing that Black people and some new white people have taken the charge and committed to this idea of Black Lives Mattering, maybe more now than ever before. So let's just talk, not for Black people, but some new white people have taken that language up for the first time in their lives. So self-care and as a political act, not necessarily only as goop, but as something that's you know what I mean, revolutionary, radical, but part of the Black liberation tradition. Anyone can answer.
I'm a Taurus, so I believe in self-care.
Yeah.
I think self-care, like love, it should be mandated. One thing that I've realized in just doing some organizing work, that you can burn out, and then what, right? Like what will you have left in your wake, in your absence? And self-care is one of those ways for you to delegate and also like, reboot, take your time and not feel bad for being human, not feel bad for needing a beat, needing a breath. just like love, just like rest, just like if you I like tequila and reality TV. Whatever your thing is, you deserve to like replenish the well so that you can get back to the work. But if you are running on empty, then how will the work get done, right? And there are so many different forces trying to infiltrate and use your absence against you. It is up to us to document. Lorde was an amazing archivist, to teach. She was an amazing educator, and to share that information widely so that when you need to take a beat, when you need to take a pause, that the work can be picked up and continued until you're ready to return.
Mm-hmm. I was on the road a couple years ago, and I started noticing that I was getting questions. Often it was like when I was in a large audience that was mostly white, and there were one or two young Black people in the audience, and their questions would be, how do you practice self-care? And this was before I was familiar with the term, and I came to understand this is a political question that these students are asking, and they're asking because they're in environments where they're not being supported, they're not being honored, they're being gaslighted.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the way it feels now in an institution that is my professional home, where I've felt supported for so long, to feel all of these distractions that require you to explain why anti-racism is important, explain why we should believe Black students when they talk about trauma that they experience, all of these things that deplete your energy and that can kind of drive you to a sense of despair. This is what we, this is why we need to begin to let ourselves make the choice to love ourselves, to heal ourselves. And I guess I'm coming to understand that doing that is about, looking after me, but it's also about saying, I want to make sure there are some of us who are in good form to help others. I want us to love ourselves so that we can be there to love one another. I feel like that's a big part of what self-care, what I'm coming to understand that it is. It's creating a broad net of people who have energy and hope to share and to spare at a time when every other person wants to siphon off the energy that you have in foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Like you, I started getting asked this question about self-care at events, and I'm old. So I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. My generation does not care for ourselves. And I had to really think about that. Like, why don't I have an answer to this question? Why do I think there's something shameful in caring about myself? And it's so important when we look at the amount of work that there is to be done in the realm of social justice, especially now. Like when I look at what's happening now and what we're up against and some of the futility of it, if we don't care for ourselves, we are not going to be prepared for whatever is next. Like we are clearly going to lose a couple battles here, but we cannot give up the war. And joy and self-care are actually part of how we get through and how we sustain ourselves for the duration, and look beyond just the immediate of, okay, like speaking about the Supreme Court, we're probably going to lose that fight. And it's not giving up to say that, it's just being realistic. And so how do we sustain ourselves to withstand whatever is going to come from that and prepare and push back? And self-care is so critical. And so I have been thinking more and more about what self-care should look like for me and how I can make sure as a teacher that I teach people to care for themselves as much as I teach them to stay in the fight.
Sometimes teaching our students to care for themselves is also saying, you can choose which kind of praise or what sources of praise are valid for you. It's not simply a matter of like waiting to receive praise from from the people who might make self-care, an urgent necessity for you. And I think that's a really important choice too. I feel like it comes through Lorde's work. There is a kind of authority that doesn't have your interest in mind, and its authority therefore is questionable. Let's get out from under the need to be, validated by those sources.
So I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to the audience. So there seems, as the fact that you all have 3 books that are coming out or have come out or coming out during this season speaks to Lorde's, there's a zeitgeist in which Lorde is, that is caught up to Audre Lorde. And I think of this with James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, and I'm working on a book on Nina Simone. And it's not coincidental that all of these figures are Black and queer. And also lived and moved throughout multiple genres of the art forms that they created or participated in. And so when the society catches up to a figure, I'm still interested in what's left to be learned, right? Because if we had fully caught up to any of them, we'd be in a radically different world, right? So I was curious if you could all just answer briefly, what is it that you still think is maybe missing from the zeitgeist? What is it about Lorde that we still are left, that we can still learn, that hasn't been told yet, that you may know personally? Maybe you didn't even include it in your foreword, but it's something still left for us to grapple with.
For me, it's her, she wrote an essay about the uses of the erotic as power. And I don't think that enough attention is given to Audre Lorde as someone who wrote about sex and sexuality and did so openly. There's a lot there that has not been mined. We tend to think, oh, she's an incredible scholar, poet, activist, and we don't tend to recognize her as also a woman, and a woman who sought pleasure from other women and who celebrated that pleasure. So I think that's something that there is still a lot of work to be explored. I think there's a lot of work to be explored about erotics and Audre Lorde.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it aligns with, I feel like some of the most important thinking about human community, about submission to others as they see and define themselves, is coming out of the queer and trans communities. And I feel, I feel my students who are, members of these communities teaching their elders that possibility is so much broader than we grew up feeling that it was, and our sense of the narrowness of identity and sexual expression was rooted in fear. Audre Lorde is fearless, and I think that some of the aspects of her work that feel challenging or shocking are the areas that we need to kind of open ourselves up to, submit to in a way, and understand the different forms of power that she wants to call our attention to, generative power.
I'm interested in the work that she did at John Jay College, and how difficult it must have been to understand the impact of mass incarceration on the community and still work inside that vacuum where these young officers in training were going, or attending and learning from her. And I'm when I return to that, I can see in the subtext that there were conversations that weren't shared on the page, and I would love to have seen how she navigated those conversations.
I'm going to take a question from the audience. So I think that one of the questions I think here is that can feminism truly be intersectional since its foundation is a white female point of view? Do Black women need to create their own movement in social theory? And I guess I would like to ask you all, because the feminism that I've inherited and grown up with is Black feminism. I didn't learn feminism as white. I learned it through Black women, artists, writers, and the women in my life. And so I was curious for you, how does Audre Lorde explode this idea that feminism belongs to or is founded by white women for you? And maybe how, if we can understand that tradition, then we understand Black feminism as the ultimate tool to our liberation.
Well, I would certainly push back on the notion that feminism is a white women's thing. White women may think that and they may act like that, but Black feminism is powerful and has been around for hundreds of years. And so Black women already have created their own movement. Also, womanism is a thing, and that is a specific Black feminism. And so I think what people need to do is make sure that they educate themselves about Black feminists who have made so much of what we do possible. And can feminism ever be intersectional? Sure. It's the better question is, can feminists ever be intersectional? Because it's really, the onus is upon us as feminists to be intersectional in our thinking, regardless of our subject position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that white feminists learned a lot from the perspectives and the practices of Black feminists, and that helped to catalyze the movement that we recognize. I love the way that Lorde talks about what collective struggle made up of disparate consciousnesses and experiences can constitute. She calls it a new level of working together. I feel like we're at a moment where so much of what we've done and how we've done it is kind of falling apart. And this might be a really great moment to say, what are you afraid of that I represent, which is what Lorde asks. And how can we take that difference and make it into something productive, something sturdier than what each of us has on our own. A lot of my understanding of what keeps alliances from happening is power. If you've got a claim to a certain kind of power, you have to really think about if you're willing to let that go in order to lend your efforts to something that could be larger, more inclusive. That's the question I think that many white people, many men, and perhaps a lot of white feminists are probably should put to themselves.
Period.
Okay, so I have one more question. Audre Lorde, this is a nice question and they're all great questions, but this is a nice one to end on, I think. Audre Lorde was uniquely courageous and fabulous in so many ways. What in her life, either early on or later, do you think helped make her that way? And Mahogany, I think I'm going to start with you, just because part of your foreword, you talk about you naming yourself and linking that to Audre's respelling of her name. So that to me seems like a really amazing, if you're a little girl and you respell your name, like that already is setting you on a path of self-definition that many people don't ever have.
Absolutely. She reintroduced herself to her own life, to the world that basically created her, and it seemingly without shame. And because of her, I was able to go home and be like, no, it's Mahogany. You're gonna just have to say it. And even now, they're like, Mo. Like it's a tough thing, but I am devout. I am devout in just owning who I am and why that name means what it means to me. And I think that just the way in which she walked, and also her hat swag, my goodness, I feel like the women writers, the hat swag, the renaming, the just the boisterous love of self, that is what shows these young people of color how to be vibrant, and I mean of all walks of life, especially the queer life, but like all walks of life, you get to feel your kind of bravery become a home.
I love that. I want to end on that.
Hat swag. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to invite Novella back to the screen. And I would like to thank all of our guests for being so dynamic and so sincere and so truthful in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Tracy and Mahogany, Roxane and Salamishah, for this nourishing conversation. As many of you were saying in the chat, how important it was to be able to have this discussion and to have these folks join us with these words. Just a reminder, you can get all 3 books in the Schomburg shop at schomburgshop.com. This is gorgeous if you actually have not seen the cover yet. It's beautiful. And then this is the selected works of Audre Lorde. And then the other one will be released in October, but you can go ahead and start to pre-order it. Again, the Lit Fest is taking place from starting yesterday all the way through Saturday. You can visit our website at schomburgcenterlitfest.org. And a reminder that tomorrow we are featuring Sterling Browne. The one thing that I will say from this conversation that was so important is that now that for some people there is time available, there's so many quotes that we all use from Audre Lorde and really sort of many other people, but the opportunity to really dig deeper into the work and see the surrounding text around those quotes will have so much more of an impact and influence our lives in such stronger ways if we give it a chance. So again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again tomorrow right here. Take care.
Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org.